a tower nearly 200 feet tall, topped with a dome the size of a house, sat on Long Island, funded by the richest man in America, built to send electricity through the ground and into the air, to every corner of the planet, for free. It was real. It was under construction. And the man who built it died so broke that his rent was paid, in secret, by the very corporation whose current he had invented. This is the true story of Nikola Tesla's last great obsession, the tower that could have changed the world, and the choice that ended it. By the time Nikola Tesla stood on a plot of land in Shoreham, New York in the summer of 1901, he was already one of the most famous scientists alive. His alternating current system had lit cities. His name was spoken in the same breath as Edison's, and by many engineers, spoken with more respect. He had shocked audiences at the Chicago World's Fair with bolts of electricity passing harmlessly through his own body. He held patents that would define the next century of electrical engineering. And yet, standing on that Long Island field, Tesla was chasing something bigger than anything he had built before. He wanted to transmit power through the earth itself, without a single wire, to any point on the globe, for anyone who wanted it. The idea did not come from nowhere. 2 years earlier, in 1899, Tesla had traveled to Colorado Springs to build a laboratory unlike anything that existed at the time. He chose the location for its altitude and for its violent, frequent thunderstorms, conditions he believed were ideal for studying how electricity moved through the atmosphere and the ground. Working with a coil that could generate millions of volts, Tesla ran experiments that produced lightning-like discharges visible for miles. It was there that he became convinced of something remarkable, that the Earth itself behaves like an enormous electrical conductor, capable of carrying a signal or even power across vast distances if you could strike it at exactly the right frequency. He called it Earth resonance. Decades later, in 1952, a physicist named Winfried Otto Schumann would independently calculate the actual resonant frequency of the space between the Earth's surface and the upper atmosphere, a real, measurable phenomenon now known as the Schumann resonance. Tesla never had that number, but his Colorado Springs notebooks show he had already grasped the underlying principle, years ahead of the physics catching up to him. Convinced his theory was sound, Tesla returned to New York in 1900 needing money to prove it at scale. He founded in J. Pierpont Morgan, the most powerful financier in the country, the man behind the creation of General Electric and, at the time, arguably the most influential businessman on Earth. Morgan agreed to put up $150,000, a substantial sum in 1901, worth several million dollars today. But Morgan wasn't investing in Tesla's dream of free global power. He was investing in a wireless telegraph station, a way to beat the Italian inventor Guglielmo Marconi at transmitting messages across the Atlantic Ocean without cable. Morgan saw a business. Tesla, in his own mind, saw something else entirely, and he did not go out of his way to correct the difference. Construction began that same year on what would become Wardenclyffe Tower. Tesla brought in Stanford White, one of the most celebrated architects in America, to design it. What rose from that Long Island field was a wooden tower nearly 187 feet tall, capped with an enormous copper dome 55 tons in weight and roughly 68 feet across. Beneath it, workers sank iron rods deep into the earth in a sprawling underground network, intended to anchor the tower's transmissions directly into the planet's own conductive layers. It was, by any measure, one of the strangest and most ambitious structures ever attempted in American engineering, a machine built to treat the entire Earth as part of its circuitry. For a while, it looked like it might actually happen. By 1902, much of the tower and the laboratory beside it were complete. Tesla worked inside that lab for hours at a stretch, refining the coils and transmitters that would, in his mind, eventually beam not just messages, but usable electrical power to receivers anywhere on the planet. With no cables, no power lines, no infrastructure standing between the generator and the person using the electricity. It was an idea decades ahead of its time, and in some ways, it still is. The seeds of technologies we use today, wireless charging pads, space-based solar power concepts, even parts of modern radio theory, trace some of their conceptual roots back to what Tesla was chasing at Wardenclyffe. But the project was bleeding money faster than Morgan had budgeted for, and the tower kept needing modifications, more materials, more time. Tesla went back to Morgan asking for additional funds. And it was around this time that Morgan learned, whether through Tesla's own words or simply by putting the pieces together, that Tesla's true ambition wasn't a telegraph relay at all. It was worldwide wireless power, distributed freely, which by its very design would be nearly impossible to meter, to bill for, or to monetize in any conventional business sense. For a financier who had built his fortune on controlling infrastructure and collecting on it, a technology explicitly designed to bypass metering and billing was not an investment. It was the opposite of one. Morgan declined to provide further funding. Around the same time, the country was also sliding through the financial instability of the period, tightening credit everywhere, which only made Tesla's position weaker. Without fresh capital, and unable to convince other investors that wireless power transmission over long distances was commercially viable given the technology of the era, Tesla had no way to keep building. Work at Wardenclyffe slowed through the middle of the decade and had effectively stopped by 1906. The tower stood unfinished and unused, a strange, silent landmark, on the Long Island shoreline for over a decade after that. Tesla never gave up trying to save it. He wrote letters, pursued other investors, and held on to hope that someone would see what he saw. No one did. In 1917, with Tesla deep in debt and the property facing seizure, the tower that had once represented his most audacious vision was demolished and sold for scrap to help cover what he owed. The metal that had been meant to carry free power to the entire planet was melted down for a fraction of its construction cost. Tesla never fully recovered, financially or professionally, from what happened at Wardenclyffe. He continued working for another 2.5 decades, filing patents, chasing new ideas in fields ranging from remote control to what he described as a defensive peace ray, a concentrated particle beam weapon he claimed could bring down aircraft at a distance. Though he never built a working version, and the details existed largely in his own descriptions rather than any surviving working device. He gave interviews on his birthdays, drawing journalists eager for his latest predictions about the future. But the grand ambitions of his younger years quietly gave way to a smaller, lonelier existence. By the 1930s, Tesla was living out of a series of New York hotels, often leaving behind unpaid bills as his money ran out. He eventually settled into the New Yorker Hotel, where he would spend the last decade of his life in Suite 3327. Those who visited him in that period described a man increasingly consumed by ritual and isolation, someone who had once commanded rooms full of the era's wealthiest industrialists, now spending his afternoons in Bryant Park, feeding and caring for pigeons he had grown attached to, at times bringing injured birds back to his hotel room to nurse them. It is a detail that shows up again and again in accounts of his final years, oddly tender against the backdrop of everything else he had lost. Tesla died alone in that hotel room on the night of January 7, 1943, at the age of 86. He was found by a hotel maid 2 days later, after ignoring a Do Not Disturb sign for longer than usual raised concern. Word of his death reached the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Office of Alien Property almost immediately, and within a short time, agents had gone through his belongings and taken possession of papers and technical documents found in his room, citing the ongoing war and questions about whether any of his work held military significance. Much of what was reviewed was eventually found to contain no undisclosed secrets beyond what Tesla had already published or patented over his long career, and many of his papers were later returned to his family and eventually made their way to the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade, where they remain today. What makes Tesla's story endure decades later isn't just what he built. It's the size of the gap between what he believed was possible and what the world around him was willing to fund, believe, or wait for. He was not chasing a modest engineering improvement. He was trying to hand every person on the planet electricity without a bill attached to it, at a moment in history when the entire architecture of industrial power depended on metering, billing, and control of infrastructure. Whether Wardenclyffe would have actually worked at the scale Tesla imagined is something historians and engineers still debate. The physics of transmitting substantial power over long distances with the technology of 1905 with meaningful efficiency and without catastrophic losses, remains, at best, unproven. Tesla believed the Earth itself would carry the power for him, with almost no loss. Most modern electrical engineers who have studied his notes are far more skeptical that the physics would have cooperated the way he expected, even if the tower had been finished. But the fact that the idea was never fully tested at scale is exactly why the question has never been closed. Tesla ran out of money before he ran out of belief. There's a version of this story that conspiracy forums and late-night documentaries love to tell. One where Tesla secretly succeeded, where the technology was suppressed by powerful interests threatened by the idea of free energy, where government agents seized proof of a working device and buried it. It's a compelling narrative. It's also not what the historical record shows. What actually happened is arguably more human, and in its own way, more haunting. There was no secret success hidden away. There was an idea genuinely ahead of its time that ran headlong into the economics of the era it was born into. Tesla wasn't silenced. He simply couldn't convince enough people, with enough money, to keep believing in something that couldn't yet be proven, and that, if it had worked exactly as he hoped, would have broken the business model of every utility company on Earth. Tesla's real legacy isn't a hidden machine in a basement somewhere, waiting to be switched on. It's the alternating current running through the walls of the room you're sitting in right now, a system he fought Edison to prove was safer and more efficient, and won. It's in the hydroelectric plant he helped design at Niagara Falls, one of the first of its kind, still shaping how large-scale power generation works today. It's in the remote control technology he demonstrated with a small boat in Madison Square Garden in 1898, decades before anyone else took the idea seriously. Wardenclyffe was his one great unfinished symphony, the ambition that outran the century he was born into. He didn't seal it away with a warning. It was torn down for scrap by creditors in full public view, while Tesla was still alive to watch it happen. Maybe that's the part of this story that deserves more attention than it gets. Not a conspiracy, not a cover-up, but the specific, ordinary cruelty of an idea arriving too early, championed by a man too proud or too transparent to hide his true intentions from the one financier willing to fund him. Tesla wanted to give the world something it wasn't ready to receive, not because the technology threatened anyone's safety, but because it threatened the way people had learned to make money from electricity itself. He never got to find out if he was right. Neither, in any complete sense, have we. The tower is gone. The land in Shoreham is now home to the Tesla Science Center, working to preserve what's left of the site and tell this story accurately, not as legend, but as history. And somewhere in that gap between what Tesla believed and what he was ever allowed to prove, his real story still sits, waiting not for someone to switch it back on, but for people willing to actually understand it.